Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast. So today we're meeting with Judith Edwards. Judith is a child and adolescent psychotherapist, and she worked for over 30 years at the Tavistock Clinic in London. The Tavistock, as many people know, is the foremost institute for training and for the application of psychological therapies in the UK. From 1996 to 2000, Judith was joint editor of the Journal of Child Psychotherapy. Apart from her clinical experience, one of her principal interests is in the links between psychoanalysis, culture and the arts, and also in making psychoanalytic ideas accessible to a wider audience. She has an international academic publishing record, and in 2010 was awarded the Jan Lee Memorial Prize for the best paper linking psychoanalysis and the arts for that year. Teaching and learning about psychoanalysis, film as a teaching tool. And we'll put links to other papers and books in the show notes. But today we're going to focus on her most recent book, Grandmotherland. Hi, Judith. Good to meet you.
Hi, David. It's good to be here. And thank you for asking me to come on here and talk about Grandmotherland. It's an important subject indeed.
Good to meet you, Judith.
Good to meet you.
We heard from David how for many years you worked as a child and adolescent psychotherapist.
Yes.
What led you down that path?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Post-university, I started off in publishing, and I thought, oh, God, no, this isn't very creative. I thought sort of editing other people's work. So I then went into teaching, and then from teaching little children, I found out that there were lots of little children who couldn't sort of take in what was offered to them. And so I started to think about ways in which they could be helped to do this. And I went into sort of counselling, and I did a particular course at the TAVI about counselling aspects in education. And then through that, I then went on to train as a child psychotherapist. And it was all very sort of happenstance, because my late tutor, Eileen Orford, she was coming out of the TAVI, and there was a sort of revolving door, and she said, "When are you going to apply to be a child psychotherapist?" And I hadn't really thought about it, but I thought, okay, I'll do it. So I did it.
Thank you. But you can see how you've kind of like built on knowledge in terms of started off down a path. There seems to be a sequence.
Exactly.
To it, and you obviously kind of like deepened your curiosity at each.
Absolutely. And if I can just interrupt a moment, Naomi, the business of editing came in very useful too. So when I became the editor of the Journal of Child Psychotherapy, so it's all kind of. My dear late friend Hilary Mantel said, "Nothing is lost ever, Judith," and she's right.
So, for the benefit of listeners, could you say a little bit about the training and what it's like to be a child psychotherapist?
Sure.
What's unique about that role?
I think, yeah, and I was really thinking about what is unique, and I think the two most unique, obviously you have training in theory and all of that, and you get tipped into the consulting room that there's not a lot of lectures about it. You just do it. But actually, the two things that were most significant, I think, one is observing a baby, which is an amazing thing to do, because most people don't really look at what babies are doing, and actually really looking and making sense of it was something very extraordinary. And the other thing is having an analysis, and that is a very extraordinarily useful thing to do. And I remember another person who's she still is a very senior member of our profession. She said oh, people come into this because they want an analysis. And I thought, well, that's not true. But actually it is. And it is a very extraordinary thing to think with someone else about the path that you've taken. And actually, it's interesting. I've been now, and this is maybe going to come up later. I've been thinking about Schopenhauer, and I've been thinking about his idea that there is no object without a subject, that we do bring our own thoughts to anything, that we cannot not, as it were. This is always that there is no such thing as, in quotes, objective reality. It's always through our subjective consciousness.
Thank you. So you've been quite a prolific writer, and your book, Love the Wild Swan, seems to cover clinical, philosophical and cultural subjects.
Yes.
How do you see those areas linking together?
Well, I think it's very important for them to link together, and if they don't, there's something kind of really wrong. And I wrote a book called Psychoanalysis and Other Matters, because I do think other matters matter. And if you kind of privilege psychoanalysis and put it above everything else, I think that's actually kind of quite a mistake. And it's better to actually think about them all together. And actually, I think I must be a postmodern person. I've been looking this up as well, because I think the grand narrative is to have no grand narrative. There isn't one way of looking at this, and you have to link all the different things together to find a mosaic which is good enough.
Thank you. Your most recent, I suppose I'm just reminded of what you just said a moment ago about linking objective and subjective together, because your most recent book is Grandmotherland.
Yes. Which
appears on the face of it to represent a full pivot from adolescents and children, looking at the other end of the spectrum. What led you to do this about change and look at and turn your attention to the opposite end of the lifespan?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And Candice Carty-Williams, who was the first Black author to get an award at the Book of the Year some years ago, said she always writes what she's trying to make sense of, which I was. And Toni Morrison said, write the book you'd like to read. And there's a way in which I had a lot of colleagues who had very productive, seemingly, relationships with their grandchildren. And because of the particular situation that I was in, I didn't. And I felt very alone and ashamed. And it was very good to write the book and start thinking about how actually I wasn't alone at all. There are lots of people who have these difficult relationships. And there is a whole chapter in the book when I talk about going into the dark wood, which is the dark wood where things are not as you expected them to be. And having no expectations is certainly a lot better than having great expectations.
So you had a really important relationship with your own grandmother.
Yes.
What was she like, and how was that how has she influenced you?
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, I have the most incredibly vivid memories of my grandmother, whose name was Florence, Flo. And my grandfather used to say, I've got 3 Florences, my stove, my wife and my daughter. They were all called Flo. And I've got these very, very strong memories. Did I idealise her? Yes, perhaps I did. Because there was a way in which something happened in my childhood that was really, really difficult. And I will kind of leave it to people to read my memoir, Pieces of Molly, where I put this together and thinking about these old ghosts. The psychoanalyst Bjorn talked about these old ghosts, they never go away. And they certainly don't. And there's a way in which I do retain this idealised picture of this wonderful granny who let me do all sorts of things. But actually, in reality, something quite different.
I was thinking here while you've been talking, Judith, about
Yes.
your comment of this is just me making a reflection, how important the baby observation
Yes.
and your own therapy was in your
Yes.
training. And so, of course, it's taking me back, and I'm remembering my own experiences of those things. And as I do with most things, I wish I could do it all over again, sort of thing, because it was so.
It is a remarkable thing to do, David, isn't it? And I think we're very fortunate to be able to do it. And what one does is one meets in a seminar group with 3 or 4 people to think about how these babies are impacted by their parents, how they impact their parents, and how things develop over time. And there's a bit in the book. Oh no, actually, it's in my. Sorry, I'm getting them muddled up. I have another book coming out, which is being published by Routledge, my old publisher, which is about explorations in fatherland. And in that, I actually reproduce the observation of a GP who he said, I used to look at babies all the time, but not in this way, and how extraordinary it was to actually not interact, but actually observe with his own subjectivity. I don't know if you've got more to say about that, David, but I do think it was a remarkable thing to be able to do.
I don't know if you're on Twitter, Judith.
No, I don't do any of that social media.
There's a couple of individuals, Suzanne Zedek and somebody called Dan. I don't know how to pronounce his surname, something like Warry, and they both show videos of very, very young babies and toddlers.
Great.
And the interactions with their parents, but they break them down into what's going on in the interaction. They're so powerful, and
yes.
and really help people see what's what attunement looks like,
yes,
and what's going right in a relationship, or where there might be something that's not so strong.
No, I think that's really good, Naomi, and anything which actually breaks down this the relationship, the reciprocal relationship between mother and child, and father and child. Let's not forget fathers, David? and actually, I could have called this Grandparentland, but I didn't, because I was just more interested in the whole idea of being a granny and being a good granny, and I knew lots of people that were good grannies, and then finding myself in the bad granny category. And I was at university in Bristol, and so afterwards I got in touch with the Bristol Support Grandmothers, Alienated Grandmothers group, run by Jane Jackson, which is in the book. And I found out that there are over 2 million grandchildren who don't have relationships with their grandmothers. I mean, that's kind of shocking, because the relationship with grandparents is such an important one. It's one step away from being a parent. And we have spent a lot of money getting legal access to the grandchildren. And I was talking to my eldest grandson, who's 7, and I said something about being an adult, and he said, "Oh, I don't want to be an adult. We have so much work to do." Well, that's parents, I think. Oh no,
I was just saying, Judith, in the book Grandmotherland, you suggest there are a number of myths about grandmothers. Can you say what you mean by this? Hello.
Okay. I got the idea from Sebald. I don't know if you know him. He wrote this book called Austerlitz, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And he talked about the painted scene with Austerlitz. He said, there's the battle, the painted scene, and then there's what really went on. And so I thought there was a painted scene about grandmothers, and then what really goes on. And so that was what started me down this track of thinking, what does really go on? And what's underneath? So, yes.
You were just telling us about some of the myths.
Oh yes, exactly. The myths, and that actually, again, my dear late friend Hilary Mantell talked about it being a myth basted in marmalade, and I think it is really, and that's why I thought about the grandmother as a heffalump, that actually it's not a real creature at all, and there's all sorts of ways in which people can be different grandmothers, and they can be different grandmothers according to their own experiences, according to the personalities of their daughters or daughters-in-law, according to the culture in which they live and the social expectations. So there's a huge amount of things which actually go together to make this potpourri of stuff, which is then called myth. And it reminded me too of years ago, I saw they were really lovely people, and they had a little girl who there was a fear that she was sexually abused, but she wasn't. And the mother talked. She said, "Oh yes," she said, "you have the mother care baby, and then you have your baby that you have." And I think that's the same with grannies, and it's the same with anything. That actually, it's best to have small expectations or no expectations, because things might turn out very different from how you thought. I hope that answered your question, David.
Well, yeah, but I was wondering whether one of the myths might be that grandmothers are nearly always benign,
yes,
and good for families.
Exactly. Well, and actually, one of my chapters is about Red Riding Hood, because I asked people, I had a lot of contributors, and I asked them what they thought about when they thought about grandmas, and they thought about Red Riding Hood. And, of course, there's this classic thing that, Red Riding Hood strays off the path and stupid girl tells the wolf where her grandmother lives. But I was also thinking about the wolf being the other side of the good grandmother, that actually that might gobble up the little child. And there is a lot to think about here. It's not all just one situation. There are lots of different situations, and I thought it was amazing that there are 58 different versions of Red Riding Hood.
Good. So how then would you sum up the role of a grandmother?
Well, that's an interesting one, because I think the role depends on the particular ideas and fantasies that the adult parents have. What would they like the grandmother to do? I mean, there's a really sad story on the Bristol group of a woman who was out of contact with her granddaughter for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and then the granddaughter came back, and the woman was really so happy, and then she disappeared again. And I said, I think probably what happened was the real granny disappointed her. She had a view in her mind of the ideal granny, and the real granny was somebody that she really felt very let down by, as it were. So there's all sorts of ways in which a granny can be what is needed or what is not needed. Because my story is on the chapter The Dark Good, and I'm called Gillian, and it started off being good, and then I don't know, it all changed, and that particular situation was because my particular daughter-in-law had a particularly difficult upbringing. Poor thing, but it just did make her very, very antipathetic towards grandparents.
Yeah. So, picking up that a little bit, do you think that the kind of things that affect a child, the habits and strategies that we all adopt to some extent as children, do you think later on in life they have an influence on the way that we behave as grandparents?
Yes,
that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think there is something about actually talking about it. Freud talked about the return of the repressed, and if you don't actually think about it, it might actually return. But actually, there's also, and this comes up in my book about fathers, there are people that had really difficult relationships with their fathers who manage to kind of make a good fist of their lives, and you think of Barack Obama as being one. So it depends on so many things. It depends on personality, history, social expectations, and actually which country you're in, because different countries have different expectations about what is expected of a grandmother, a grandparent.
Thank you. Judith, it used to be a thing that we would say in psychotherapy, this is before my time, of course, that you couldn't work with older people. In fact, I think Freud said something similar, didn't he? Do you think that's true, or
I don't. I think I don't really know what Freud was playing at, actually, because it's not true. I mean, certainly the younger you get people, the more malleable and interesting and interested they are. But actually, I think you can work with people of any age, and actually, Bion exemplified that in his work with psychotic adults.
I think that in the prison system, I encountered when I first went to work there, men who were in their sort of 50s or 60s,
yes,
and had already been written off by
yes.
the prison service in terms of whether it was possible for them to achieve change. They were labelled as unsuitable psychopaths in quotation marks, and actually people made some amazing transformations, and not necessarily just looking to get out, but looking for a sense of peacefulness and inner contentment.
Absolutely, Naomi. I think one's memories and one's personality can be modified over time, but it's not magic. It's not quick, and it takes time. But actually, as again, my dear friend Hilary Mantel, my God, she was a good friend. Anyway, she said, this area is ripe for exploration, and there is so many ways in which it's not only children that can change, it's adults that can change, and it's very important for us to think about adults changing in order to help children change. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Judith, you in your book, you quote Anna Karenina. Now, I read Anna Karenina when I was a teenager, but I couldn't remember this quotation that you give.
Oh, it's right. It's right from the beginning. It's the first sentence in the book, David.
Oh, right. Well, I'll go back and read it again, at least to the end of the first page. You quote Anna Karenina as saying, "Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." What did you mean by that? What do you think?
Well, actually, I would question that. I'm not sure that Tolstoy was absolutely right, because I think there are different factors at play in every family, and actually he does then go through the book talking about the different ways in which so-called happy families have things underneath which are not so happy. And I did find in the grandmother book that actually people who had happy stories to tell, they were quite actually reluctant to tell them, because there is always the feeling that it might change. You might make a wrong move, you might do something wrong, and so I think Anna Karenina was a book in which did unfold something about unhappy families, and how happy families and unhappy families all have different factors within them.
Thank you.
You mentioned in your book, Judith, that there are different names given to grandmothers.
Yes.
Gran, granny, grandma, nan or nana. Do you think there's meaning in those different naming conventions? Are some people more likely to, does it say something about the relationship?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I think part of it is to do with class, isn't it? But last night I was watching on television a play which was directed by David Ayer in the 80s, called Country, and she was the nanny, was called Nana. So there's different ways in which different names are chosen, and I have one person who, she wanted to be called G, not grandmother at all. And I think that was a denial of mortality. And we're all, that we're all going to die. Let's be quite open about that. And grandparents, already one of my grandmothers has left the planet. I hate that word, passed away, but anyway, that there's a way in which there's something which can be thought about in terms of are you going to be called G or Granny or Nana or whatever, and it's not only about class.
No, I think that's an interesting point that you make. My own mum, she became a grandmother at about, I want to say 40. And
Whoa.
She said she wanted to be called Nana because that sounded younger than being Granny or Grandma. But both my grandparents were Nanas to me. Nana with the pink hair and from a disastrous hair dye experiment. And then the other Nana who I saw more regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like everything else. I don't think there's a quote that I think's in my introduction, and it says it was said by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was a philosopher in the 19th century, and he said, "Don't go along the path. Go where there's no path, and leave a trail." And I think that's what I hope this book is going to do. That it is going to leave a trail. And I've got something that he also said. He said, the purpose of life, what is the purpose of life? And he said it wasn't to be happy, but to be useful, honourable and compassionate, to have it make some difference that you've lived and lived well. And I hope that people reading this book will find some new thoughts which might make a new trail for them.
So, I mean, you said that you don't think that the names are necessarily related to class or geography, but do we have different attitudes or values?
Oh, goodness, yes.
Is there a greater appreciation of the role of the grandmother in any discernible way across different groups in society?
Yes, I think you really have to think about where you are in the world, the geography. And there's an interesting chapter which is all about grandmothers around the world, and I quote some research from Japan, where the grandmother is expected to go and look after the mother, and her satisfaction rating goes down and down and down because, of course, she's inevitably she disappoints her daughter or her daughter-in-law. So there's all sorts of ways in which you have to factor in all the different aspects of being a grandmother, where you're a grandmother, what the social idea is, and so that's why I thought about the grandmother as the heffalump, and Pooh and Piglet said they'd seen a heffalump, and they tried to catch a heffalump. But you can't catch a heffalump and you can't catch a granny. I mean, she isn't pickled in aspic. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
So, Judith, you're no longer working at the Tavistock full time, and I think you probably do a bit of work there just to keep your hand in, keep contact. So, but I suspect you haven't fully retired. So,
what I've done, David, is actually, I didn't kind of know this would happen. I've done a lot more writing, and that's what kept my hand in. And then actually, you did one of the questions you asked was about how to keep sort of emotionally healthy, and I think that's something you really have to go back to your founding fathers and mothers and think where you've come from and where you're going, and that actually this is a way to keep healthy. As well as I also do volunteering, which is an interesting one, that there's all sorts of ways in which you can actually keep yourself flourishing after retiring. And there's a person that my husband and I know who works with retired people, and he says, "When is the weekend?" And they say, "Oh, Saturday and Sunday." And he says, "No, it's whenever you choose." That actually there's a way in which we can be much more free and to choose what we choose. But actually I think I used to get up at some unearthly hour to go and have my analysis 5 times a week. I mean, I couldn't do it now, but there you go.
Yes, indeed. Well, thanks very much indeed, Judith. We've got to the end, really. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think I'm just very glad that I've had this opportunity. Thank you very much to take this line for a walk, as the artist Paul Clay said. He said you put a pencil and then you take it for a walk. And I sort of didn't know where it was going, and a lot of the people who wrote for me didn't know where they would go, and some of them changed, and some of them didn't. And I think there's so much to be had here, and that actually, this is how the best work is done in psychoanalysis and in life, is actually kind of just seeing where things go, and not having a set idea.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much, Judith. Good to meet you.
Thanks a lot.
Good to meet you.